Thanks for joining us at the Business Growth Cafe, where each week we select from a menu of topics for a focused discussion with an industry expert to provide insights that can impact your business's growth. With your host, Angelo Ponzi.
I am Angelo Ponzi, your host here at the Business Growth Cafe, and thank you for joining us. Each week we select from a menu of topics that can impact business growth to discuss with experts from a wide variety of disciplines. And today at the cafe, I'm excited to have David Mistofsky, Director of Strategy at the Rhythm Agency, to discuss digital strategies to grow your business. David, welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me, Angelo. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited. I was just mentioning a few minutes ago, I originally saw you a few months back on a panel for the American Marketing Association. So I put your name on my list. It took us about 5 months to get here, so I'm really excited about today's show. Before we get started, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself, about the Rhythm Agency, and so the audience can have a perspective of who you are.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been in digital marketing for just over 10 years. It's weird. It kind of happened by accident, which is odd, but ended up coming in from a background of SEO. Okay. So it started off with SEO, very small SEO agency that ended up moved to another one, kind of kept growing, and then got interested a little bit more in digital strategy. So with SEO, it's kind of one function of it, but started kind of wanting to know a little bit more about brands and all that stuff, and just kept growing, and ultimately found myself home at Rhythm. So Rhythm Agency is a full-service digital agency. We pretty much offer everything. I lead the digital strategy team there. Professionals include paid, SEO, analytics, et cetera, et cetera. So we kind of pride ourselves in using a little bit of data, a little bit of theory, creating these ideas, and moving forward with them. And hopefully we find those partners out there to work with us as well.
Yeah, fantastic. I know Rhythm's a great agency. I was just telling you in the hallway as we met. I had the privilege of doing some strategy work for them a few years ago on a new business pitch. And I have a whole talk about new business because I believe that is the lifeblood of any agency. My background actually is agency and client side. Yep. I was fortunate enough to grow an agency and sell it, but I came from Bozell originally, and so it was involved on multiple agencies, and then I've been client side, everything from ad manager up to chief strategy officer. So I get to wear both sides of the fence. I get to make the decisions and, of course, pitch myself on why I should try to do those. So before we get started, a question I always ask my guests when it comes to thinking about growing your business. Now, we'll talk about Rhythm's business and your involvement as a senior member of their team. What keeps you up at night?
Sure. So obviously with an agency, basically whatever the client's problems are become our problems, right? So that is really what keeps me up at night. And it could be a myriad of different things. Sometimes, I'll sit there and think about, gosh, what's something different that we can do, something unique that takes this client to the next level. But really, that's just the gist of it is whatever their problems become our problems. And that keeps me up at night.
I can see that. And I empathize. Like I said, I was in the agency business and I can relate to that.
Yeah.
So when I think about digital strategy, and I've talked to clients about that, and we'll get into some of this as we go along, the goal obviously is what do you want the strategy to do? And typically for me, it's always generate leads. And of course, that means if I generate leads, there's a return on my investment. So when I think about strategy, it really kind of depends on the type of company, B2B, B2C, retail, service, all those kinds of things. So there isn't a cookie cutter solution. But when we think about lead generation from a digital standpoint, what's your perspective on that, and what advice can you give the listeners who are thinking about developing a program?
Sure. So I like that you prefaced with, it totally depends, right? It's a hard question to answer. But some things that I kind of thought about really is, what I find, at least in my experience, is a lot of times when we work with these individuals on the other side is that a lot of times they get into this thought of what do I need, right? I need more leads. I need this. I need that. And that kind of influences their strategy. So we try to get them to take a step away and think, okay, great. Those are your business goals and the KPIs that you want to go after. But let's start to think about what the customer needs or what this potential lead needs. And what are all the things that we can do to address that? And so we start to think of that on kind of a macro and a micro level. And some notes that I had here really on the macro level, things that we kind of know, right? Identify who your users are, personas, we're all sort of familiar with that. And then one of the things that we kind of like to live by at Rhythm is Google's micro moments. And it's kind of, they have varied ones, but I need to know, I need to go, I need to buy. There are kind of these micro moments that as we now have these, cell phones, mobile phones, we're interacting with brands on small scales consistently. So how does that go? And then also kind of the customer journey, and then what are different variants of that? Sometimes people just go, okay, this is the ideal customer journey. Well, not every situation is an ideal situation. We also try to think about what happens when things go wrong. And then on the micro level, we try to go where those users are, whether it be through programmatic, other things like that, which we could talk about a little bit more.
Yeah, please.
And then lastly, one thing that I wanted to add is just don't forget to continue testing. That's something that it seems like more and more people are getting involved with A/B testing, but just because you set that strategy doesn't mean that it's going to remain that way always. So you constantly have to test and refine.
Yeah, absolutely. I call it keeping the pulse, your finger on the pulse of the market, because it is constantly changing. And if you set it and let it go, and you're not looking at what's going on, chances are it got off course. When I think about strategy, then, in trying to get buy-in, if you will, from management, they always want to know. They go right to, well, I want to be on Facebook and YouTube or whatever, and they don't. Sorry, out there, management folks and listener land, but a lot of times they just don't understand the different aspects of how this strategy comes together. So, selling it from a marketing standpoint on up to senior management, what are some advice could you give some of the marketing folks that are listening today?
Sure. So again, every situation is different. Sometimes I've encountered where, maybe there's some senior level management that is, how do I say this politely? Maybe just not up on the up and up as far as the importance of digital. But that said, almost everybody now has a mobile phone, right? A smartphone. So one of the things that I've used, and although it's not necessarily a recent study, but in 2015, there was a study that in the morning, we're by a factor of 3 more likely to reach for our mobile phone than we are for our significant other in the bed, right? So that's how personal that device has become. And that device really encapsulates everything that's digital, whether you're doing search, Facebook, whatever it may be, right? So I kind of say, look at the importance of this in everybody's life. If you're not advertising on digital, whatever area it is, you're missing that. And then, of course, one of the things that I would also recommend if they want to get more granular is really start to think about when it comes to a lead or a sale or a service, what's the actual value of that? And then see if you can work that back through some of your analytics. So that way you could do a little bit of a small test campaign, right? Say, okay, hey, maybe you're not ready to jump full in. That's okay. But can we start with something small, just a little bit of a media budget? We've got our ROI, and then you work on it. And if you show a positive ROI, then you can say, let's scale this.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. There's so many, and you know better than I, different channels and new programs coming out on a daily basis. I mean, if we just sat and did nothing but read every day, that could be a full-time job for us. So when we look at some of the standards, right, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and display and retargeting and PPC and SEO, I mean, that's kind of the core, if you will, unless I've missed one of those. So when designing the strategy, what are some of the effectiveness of some of these different tools, if you will? I'll just call them tools. And again, that might vary based on B2B, B2C, based on strategy and all those things. So I'm giving you a big, broad question and trying to get you to narrow it down to some specifics.
Sure, I'll try my best. So again, it totally depends. But that said, when it comes to Facebook, what we like about Facebook, at least at Rhythm, is that it does provide a great testing environment for some test campaigns. The advertising tends to be a little bit more cost effective than maybe going with PPC right out the gate. So a lot of times when we have this idea, we've created this strategy of who we think we want to go after, we'll start to test it there with some demographic data, and then we'll say, okay, this is it. I think we've kind of honed this in for a small price. Now let's start to scale this up.
Well, let me interrupt for a second.
Sure.
So let's talk about Facebook for a second. How effective is B2B on Facebook?
B2B can be effective, but we generally wouldn't go there. A lot of times we may go to LinkedIn instead. Okay. It's still worth being on most platforms, but again, it depends. But yeah, typically we do a little bit better with consumer products. Or potentially lead generation, maybe if it's an attorney service and somebody's searching for something on there. But it's still worth exploring, but definitely spend a little bit more time looking into it if it's the right fit. But still, for a small price, you can still experiment with what resonates with some of those users, and then you could really spend the bulk of it somewhere else if you need to.
Okay. let's continue.
Sure. So LinkedIn, again, a little bit more professionally minded, right? We tend to use that for thought leadership. So to kind of get yourself top of mind, right? Creating content marketing, content calendars, things of that nature. Again, this all depends, but just that's where we seem to have the most success, is putting that information out, so that way later on, when we're hitting them with a little bit more direct action, they already are familiar with the brand. Oh yeah, I know them. They know what they're talking about. Services that sense. So LinkedIn, we have some good success there.
So for your clients, are you using a combination, I'll call it a post and paid on LinkedIn?
Potentially, yeah,
Okay.
whatever we can do. Obviously, the most important is creating the content, and a lot of times that's a struggle for depending on the size of the organization. But we work with them to create that content. We put that out there, whether it's a post or whether we're pushing the post. So we'll absolutely do that. Get them top of mind. Again, typically thought leadership, and then from there, normally we'll go to maybe programmatic. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit here,
Okay.
but with programmatic, we found great success with that as well. Actually, been using programmatic pretty heavily now, and we found great success with both static display and also video as well. I think as more and more users expect to visually see something, and again, even with a B2B, if it's a service that's offered, a video that can explain what that service is really quickly works great. Again, people don't just want to read, they want to see and believe as well.
Okay, and I mean, a lot of the recent articles and surveys talk about the importance of video over a lot of other things. So why don't we talk a little bit, just for the listeners, in case they don't know what programmatic is?
Sure.
And at least give them some context on that.
Sure. So traditionally, let's say 5 years ago, you would do display advertising through Google, right? And Google has their ad network that they put out these static ads. We're all pretty familiar with seeing them on the side rails of websites and things of that nature. What programmatic does is basically takes that and amplifies it with an element of artificial intelligence. So it's kind of real time it's occurring. So rather than having a human, so a human comes in, basically sets it up, says, here's where we want to go, here's who we think we're going to go after, here's the ads that we're going to use, and then these are the places that we think it would be best applied, and then it goes from there. And then in real time, the artificial intelligence basically gets an understanding of, okay, this ad, we're spending a lot of money, but it's not being effective, whereas over in this particular channel, we're a lot more effective, so it automatically then takes the money and starts applying it there. So it's like a stream almost of your ad dollars in your ads, and it finds the path of least resistance and then goes in that direction. And then periodically, of course, you have a professional coming in to make sure things don't go off the rail, or alternatively, hey, we have new information of users we want to target, let's put that into the system, and then it goes in that direction as well.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I just wanted some clarity for the
Sure.
audience on that. Thank you very much.
Some of the other things I had here, so just some notes. Instagram, we tend to get higher engagement rates than we do with Facebook, so there's opportunity there. We've had better results with the slightly younger demographic and female, so if that's somebody that you want to go after, you may look at that. Again, there's audience everywhere, but that's just where we've had some great success. YouTube, we talked about videos, awesome stuff with YouTube. I like that they have options where basically you can advertise, and if the user doesn't watch the whole video, you don't actually pay for it. So again, if it's not a direct fit, the user skips that video, you don't have to pay, which is a great way to save some money. And ultimately too, YouTube is the #2 search engine, right? So I think I put a number here. It has 1.5 billion logged in users per month. And feeds over 1 billion hours of video each day, right? So there's a lot of reach there, whether it's B2B, B2C. People want to understand, if you're selling a software platform or a service, what is that? What does it look like? How can I see it? We're just in this age of the educated consumer, right? So just being told something isn't enough. We want to live it, experience before we commit to it.
Okay. Display, retargeting.
So we have used display before as traditional display, like Google Ad Network. We tend to not use that as much anymore because we've really gone more towards programmatic,
Okay.
just because it's a little bit more efficient in our opinion.
Okay. What about search, voice search, and chatbots and things, and AI actually, and coming into this idea of digital? How are they all going to play?
Sure. So voice search, I think we're already seeing an impact based on that. So kind of coming from an SEO background, been pretty innately involved with keyword research and things of that nature. And I've personally seen the change in search behavior. It's changed from more broad, keywords, just lots of keyword dense searches, to a more natural, right? So the way we converse is now how people are starting to search because they're talking with their phones. In fact, quick side note, it was kind of crazy. I was watching some younger kids at a soccer game, and all they were doing was just searching by talking to their phones, right? So it's definitely a different experience, but I feel like we're already seeing that impact. And if you have a quality team, whether you have a search engine optimization professional, they should know that those keywords are still in there. So I think that's great. It will be interesting. I'm kind of curious to see what happens. I know Amazon is exploring advertising with Alexa, but basically Amazon, being the 800-pound gorilla, is trying to dictate that you have to spend a copious amount of money for it. So it'll be nice to see if eventually they break that down to a little bit more cost-effective in the near future. And then depending on the service that you offer, obviously you can create apps for those voice assistants. That may be an opportunity as well, although those tend to be for bigger brands.
Okay. Do a lot of your clients still creating apps?
Not so much. Yeah. I think, with any ecosystem, right, if you get into it initially, you have, you're kind of there, right? So it's a little bit harder to get in. We do have some folks that want to explore that. We have conversations with them. We say why. More often than not, it's just kind of, oh, it's cool. We want to have an app. So why do you want to have it? Great. Is there something that we can offer? So, the web sphere keeps moving in a positive direction, and there's things now like progressive web apps that provide you with a lot of the functionality that an app does without going in that whole realm. So it may work, it may not, and there may be more cost-effective routes for you to take.
Do you with your clients get into personalization and based on behavior?
Absolutely. Yeah. So what we found, you can get really crazy with personalization, right? But more often than not, people aren't willing to maybe invest at that point on making sure that their CRM or their web platform is compatible with that. So even just going back to that whole personas, user journey mapping, kind of creating that out is basically just creating here are the channels that we want to talk to them. Here's the tone. Here's what we think they want to do, what they feel, and how we can talk to them. And then kind of creating these little branches out, right? So if they don't go here, here's where we go. Here's how that tone changes. So that's kind of the cheap and dirty way to do it. I would say that's a little bit more popular right now, just because, again, it's cheaper, it's quicker. But yes, that's something that we're trying to always push individuals to do.
Yeah, I was doing some competitive work about a year ago in one of the big companies in content marketing with some really incredible personalization engine. But the entry point was about $250,000 in order to buy that, and it was crazy. Even when I found an individual engine that we could tack on to the program that my client had, it was still like $100,000, and it was a little much for small businesses.
It's a bit pricey, yeah.
Now, you've mentioned a few times that you came from the SEO world. So I want to talk about SEO and the value of SEO. I can honestly say that in the last year or so, I've recommended SEO to some clients, and I've said this on another show where I had an SEO expert on. My clients got impatient. It's like, well, we set this up, and all of a sudden I'm not getting leads, I'm not getting this, and they're in and out in 30, 45 days. So they don't really give it an opportunity to take effect. So what is a time frame that anybody who's implementing SEO should do? And how important is SEO as part of the overall digital strategy?
Yeah, so SEO is definitely not dead. A lot of people say SEO is dead. Organic searches keep increasing the amount of users that do it, both on desktop and on mobile. So it's there. But one of the things that we do when a client comes in is we try to do an element of re-education as far as what SEO is. Now, having done this for a long time, right, SEO originally was just it was just, here's my money, do whatever magic you need to do, right? And then as the client becomes more savvy, and as we become more savvy, it becomes, well, we need rankings and traffic. So really what I do is I sit them down and I say, look, what do you want? What is it that you're looking to get? Oh, I want leads. I want to sell stuff. Okay, let's work back through that, right? So how do we get that? Okay, well, we need to get different traffic to your site. Here are all the different channels that are there. One of them is organic, which SEO addresses, although it does play into a little bit of paid as far as quality scores. But that's where we try to get them to go, is basically just say, hey, look, it's important, but yeah, it's a commitment, right? You don't stop marketing any other channel when it comes to your business. Why would you just think that this is something that you can turn on and turn off? The probably bad analogy that I use is, the marketing world is a race that's ongoing, and it continues to go. Ultimately, if you want to be in the front and you haven't been playing, you've got a long distance to run, and you got to run hard, and it's going to take you a long time to catch up, and it depends on the level of effort that you put in. If you're only going to put a few marketing dollars behind it, you can't expect to catch up overnight. You're going to need to put in 6 months, a year, however long it is. If you do invest a little bit more, if you're a little bit more aggressive, you could be a little bit faster. But even then, it's not like it used to be where we'd make changes and just overnight you'd be number one. It takes time. It's a more mature marketplace.
Okay. So what I said before was patience. That's what I tell my clients. They have to have patience for SEO. It's like brand building. You can't create your brand overnight, and you can't use SEO to drive your leads overnight as well.
Absolutely. And that's why, with all things, there's different tools in your arsenal, right? You should have SEO, but at the same time, if you need instant gratification, you can do paid, but you're going to pay a lot more for it, right? You can hit on multiple channels and go that way.
Okay. Are there, in your experience, and are there common mistakes that you have seen businesses make over and over and over again when it comes to digital strategy and implementing digital campaigns? And where I'm going with this, of course, if we have common mistakes, those are the kind of the flip is what not to do in the future.
Sure. So this one kind of, the first one that came to mind is really what you touched on, which is patience, right? So it's a fast-moving world, which I understand, but a lot of folks don't want to invest the time or effort to actually sit down and think about what's my strategy, what do I need to do, how do I go forward. Also, again, some of the common pitfalls I see is, which I mentioned earlier, is not really thinking about what the prospect, whether it's a lead or a sale, what they're thinking, feeling, and doing. Not leveraging all those micro moments, right? So somebody's not just necessarily searching, or they may search on their computer at first, and then they may go to lunch and search for something. So you've got to be everywhere that they're at and thinking all of those individual areas. And then another one is not thinking of what happens when a negative experience occurs. So ultimately, a lot of people get in this guise of when everything goes perfect, this is exactly how it's supposed to happen. But understand that bad things can happen, and then there's ways that you can address that and hopefully right that course. So ultimately, that it does turn into a sale or a lead later on.
Okay. So what happens when we look at the Glassdoors of the world and Yelps when you do get something negative? What's the strategy to kind of alter that?
Well, it kind of depends on the brand, right? What are the brand attributes, right? So if you have that friendly, outgoing thing, then obviously we'd recommend engaging with that. But I think, yeah, ultimately, I think you should engage with it, but don't use canned responses, right? People are savvy enough. I mean, even users now, when they go on reviews, they realize some reviews are total, pardon me, BS, and then other reviews are not and genuine, and they're getting better at deciphering that. So I think if you just go on there and you react to it in a positive direction, which is, hey, I'm sorry that you had that experience. We'd like to, do whatever it is, or reach out to us. And a lot of times users will see, oh, look, that person didn't even respond. They're probably a troll, or they don't care. So I think that's a positive way to go about it, is see it, confront it in a positive way, and then just see where it goes. Now, obviously, if it's totally off the rails, it may not even be worth addressing. It just depends.
Okay. A few years ago, I was working for a research company, and we did a pretty extensive study on social media engagement. Mm-hmm. And I won't take you down that path because it's a long story. But talk about the importance of engagement. A lot of times, one of the things we found in the study, when we were doing it for some clients, they were going through and people were liking and liking and liking and liking and liking. And at the end of the day, who cares?
Yeah.
Right? So there was no engagement. And I know, like, now people are saying if someone makes a comment, comment back. Engage with your customer or your people on LinkedIn, whatever it happens to be. So talk about engagement, and how do you really measure engagement and drive engagement? And are you guys doing it at Rhythm for your clients, or are you helping your clients do it internally?
Yeah, so the one area that we don't really go into too much is social media management, as far as community management. And that's not because we don't want to. Obviously, a lot of companies do, but because we do believe it's such a personal experience, crisis, things of that nature. So we'll help set up strategy when it comes to, like, here's how you should handle certain situations, things of that nature. But yeah, you can't just like it. You've got to engage with the comments. The more engagement you get, because quite frankly, we're in the age of instant gratification. Everybody wants to know everything that they can. They want to have a personalized touch. And it is, right? Like, we've gotten so used to automation that having that one key difference where, yes, you are uniquely responding to what they're saying, is a great brand moment. How we can measure that sometimes, social media may be a little bit difficult, but again, we look at basically before and after you start an engagement campaign, right? So a lot of times this brand hasn't done anything in social media other than the likes, and then we're able to measure that, okay, what kind of level of engagement through social listening tools, things of that nature. So hopefully, yeah, that would be ideal. We realize, though, that does take a lot of effort and time, but it's worthwhile, or at least getting in there for some of those comments and engaging, because even if you're engaging just a little bit, it shows that you care.
Do you guys always work on whatever those metrics happen to be up front, and making sure that whatever the campaign's goal is, that you have all those? I mean, it's an obvious question, so it's a softball question. Setting up all the metrics first, and yeah, the answer is yes. But are there certain measurements, KPIs, that you look for in any kind of digital campaign?
Yeah, absolutely, right? So every channel has different metrics that you can look at, but really what's most important is ultimately what's the final goal, right? Is it a lead or a sale? And that's kind of, if we can take that, we can ascribe a value to that and work that back. We're really big on attribution, right? So not just, oh, you had a lead, but what is that value? Because then we know if you're investing X dollars in SEO or Y dollars in paid, are you getting that return on ad spend or that return on investment? So that's kind of the biggest one, is really just, and I find, especially when you have brick and mortar, it's very hard to decipher that. But anything we could do to basically try to break that down, that's huge and vast. And so any metric that goes into that, we then try to map that all the way back from a form submission to clicks on buttons. All of it we try to get a value to. And so that way we can know and we can start working with the client to say, well, let's do this. Let's change this. Oh, we put a red button. That equaled X amount more dollars for you.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, believe it or not, we're coming down to the last couple minutes. Oh, wow. So it just blew by as they always do. So before we get to the very end, what are your top 2 recommendations or suggestions for the listeners that keeps them on the right path to grow their business using digital?
Sure. So I would think number 1 is probably this is a big one, right? So invest in ensuring that your data that you're working with, and I assume everybody already has a data tracking platform, invest in making sure that that data is accurate. More often than not, what we find is there's an element of inaccuracy in that data, which causes a lot of headaches later on, because as we said, when you're trying to get attribution and work your way back, when you suddenly realize that maybe for a large organization, you weren't filtering out any of the employee traffic that was artificially inflating whatever was occurring, you now suddenly not only have to say, okay, well, what you believe to be true is no longer true, and all the greatness that you thought is not true. And then that's a hard conversation to have. So we try to say, hey, let's work to make sure that your data is with full integrity and is clean, so that moving forward we have an ideal situation. So that's one of them. And then really that other big one is absolutely calculate the value of a sale, whether it's a customer lifetime value or transaction. So that way you can work your way back and you're not just throwing dollars. And you can compare. If you've worked more with traditional, throwing out flyers, you know, X amount of dollars are coming out, and this is what we've seen. Now that we're moving towards digital, we see X amount of dollars going in, and this is what we're getting out of it.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much. Why don't you tell the audience how they can reach you and get a hold of you?
Certainly. So I'm an SEO guy, right? So just search for me on Google, right? So just look for David Mistofsky. That's a tough last one. So it's Mistofsky put together, David Mistofsky, and you can search for Rhythm, and I'm sure you'll find me either on LinkedIn or on Rhythm, and we're always happy to help out. Yeah,
thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I'm really excited that we finally got to do it. Like I say, it took about 5 or 6 months, I think, finally to get you on the show, but I'm so happy, and I think this was a great conversation, and the listeners are really going to benefit. Well, thank you for joining us at the cafe today. You can find out more about me and read my blogs or watch my show videos at theponzigroup.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn. That is the easiest way. Or you can subscribe to the show at thebusinessgrowthcafe.com, or we are now on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, Spreaker, SoundCloud, and coming soon to iHeartRadio and others around the world. Join me next week for lunch at the Business Growth Cafe.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion at the Business Growth Cafe with your host, Angelo Ponzi. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast and visit our website at www.businessgrowthcafe.com. Read Angelo Ponzi's blogs at www.theponzigroup.com.